Hi, welcome to this edition of Book Notes. Today we're talking with Don Miller, who's the author of Blue Like Jazz, which was a New York Times best-selling book. And we're just about to release his new book, which is called A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. I read this in 2 sittings on the plane and couldn't put it down, and was truly sorry when I finished it. And I'm just really excited to share with you Don's story and some of the inside and backstory to this book. Don, we're glad you're here with us today.
Glad to be here.
Don, when you published Blue Like Jazz, how did that go? I mean, what was the story behind writing that book and it becoming a bestseller?
I had started a little publishing company. We printed about 4 or 5 books. We broke even. We never lost money. My pastor actually sat me down because we were talking. He's one of my best buddies, so we were actually talking as friends. And he said, what are you doing with your life? And I said, well, I think I want to be a writer, but there's no money in it. And he said, well, you can't do that if there's no money in it. If you want to get married and have a family, you're going to have to make some money. And he said, here's the deal. If you can get this much money for your next book, then I would stick with writing. You guys got a hold of the first several chapters of Blue Like Jazz, offered a 2-book deal for that exact amount of money.
Really?
That exact amount of money.
That story.
Yeah, it's true. And I just went, okay, God wants me to do this. And so Blue Like Jazz came out, and then the book began to take off, and it was probably 2 years after the book began to take off that I shut down the publishing company. I mean, I really held on to it, thinking this is what I want to do. And I didn't like putting myself out there. That's just not totally my personality a little bit. I don't have a lot of answers. I'm not a very polished person, so I didn't seem to fit. But I didn't realize the culture was actually looking for that guy.
Right.
And so it kind of took off. And now, I mean, as much as I love publishing, I've become a writer. I mean, I really wake up every day and think about how to make a better book.
When did the shift take place in your mind when you first began to think of yourself as a writer?
When enough people told me that I was.
Really?
Yeah, I could never look in the mirror
How
and say...
How many did that take?
Many thousands. Many thousands of people saying, what's it like to be a writer? And for a long time, I would have to kind of make up an answer in order to please this person because they thought I was a writer. And then you kind of go, well, enough people have asked me that. I guess I am. That's what I am. And your identity changes. Which is, as a side note, theologically, I'm convinced that our identity comes from outside of ourselves, not from inside of ourselves. That it's actually God saying, this is who you are.
And sort of confirming.
And you agreeing with it. And so the fact that other people, which works against us, people can lie to us and tell us that we're something and we can believe it, but it comes from outside of ourselves. So surrounding ourselves by communities of people who affirm a positive identity is the way to change.
Okay, it's one thing to be a writer and to think of yourself as a writer, but at a certain point, you became a best-selling author, and that had to be a shift. Something had to happen inside as you realized that.
I don't know that shift has really taken place yet. I mean, I remember, obviously making the New York Times is a big deal. It's what every author, it's one of the milestones of writing books that you think, this is great, and I'm being affirmed at least by sales, by a number of people.
From reading A Million Miles, it sounds like the success of Blue Like Jazz initially kind of worked against you. It was so successful that it kind of created a hitch in your mind.
Yeah, I got sidetracked. When I was a kid, I grew up in Texas, and I went to this church camp one time where the speaker actually asked us to write down what we want to be at 35. And we were supposed to write this down and give it to a friend. And we drew names out of a hat. And so my friend was Sandy Whitley, my best friend's girlfriend. And so I wrote down that I wanted to live in Oregon, that I wanted to be a best-selling author, and that I had a certain financial goal, and I would not get married until I was older than 35. I wrote all this down in this list, and I forgot about it.
It was a prophecy. But
I know that subconsciously what I did was I defined my life. And so what was happening was, in story terms, the protagonist has to have an ambition. And if he has an ambition, the story makes sense. Conflict makes sense if he wants something, all these kinds of things. And so what happened was I moved to Oregon, I met the financial goal, I became a best-selling author, but that's the end of the story. I mean, your story is over now. Yeah, and so I didn't realize what was happening to me was that I woke up one morning and I was no longer inside of a story, and life no longer made sense.
Wow.
I didn't know what was going to happen next, and it took me a long time. I mean, it took me more than a year of working on a screenplay with some friends for the movie Blue Like Jazz, working on screenplay, studying the elements of story to realize, oh my word, I don't have an ambition anymore.